A certain level of crime might well have been tolerated, but increasingly the country became a cockpit for Islamic radicalism too. The vast majority of Chechens are Sufi Muslims. Their rites involve chanting and dancing themselves into a trance-like state. It's an oral tradition in which long-dead holy men are venerated as saints, very different to the ascetic or Wahhabi Islam observed in Saudi Arabia or by the Afghan Taliban. But radical Islamic missionaries were drawn to Chechnya. With almost unlimited amounts of money, they found many followers for their Wahhabist beliefs, people ready to vent their fury on signs of Western or Soviet decadence.
They give you money. You bring 5 people, you become a commander, and they give you a car. It was a stimulus to young people to join these brigades. They might not have actually understood what Wahhabism is, but these young people liked the good clothes, they liked the money, and they liked the cars.
It was more than money. The trauma of war left many young fighters ripe for conversion. By the summer of 1998, radical Islamic commanders were so powerful that they forced Maskhadov, not a religious man, to institute Sharia or Islamic law in the Republic. The secular parliament was disbanded. This execution was ordered by the Sharia court. The crime was adultery and murder.
Chechnya's slide towards an Islamist anarchy alienated many. Among them was Chechnya's religious leader, the Mufti Ahmed Kadyrov. A warlord who'd once fought the Russians, he switched sides, teaming up with Moscow's hardliners.
We had to tackle the problem. It was obvious that President Maskhadov was a puppet. It was the warlords who held the power, and they only ever obeyed Maskhadov when it suited them.
Time was running out for Chechnya's disastrous experiment in independence. By the summer of 1999, with Yeltsin ill and at the end of his term, the Kremlin searched for a successor. In blew Vladimir Putin, young, sober, a former KGB spy, a man of action. Putin was initially backed by Yeltsin's favorite mogul.
Why? Not because he was my friend. For sure, because I knew him, and I was sure that he continued reform of Yeltsin. And it is the reason why I supported Putin a lot.
Late that summer, some of the murkiest events in the Chechnya story began to unfold. In August, a group of radical Islamic Chechen fighters raided across the border into Russia. A few weeks later, there were several terrorist bombs in Russia. Over 300 were killed. It wasn't clear who'd done it, but most Russians were ready to blame the Chechens.
That was the moment of truth. The government had to step into the game. If we hadn't intervened then, it would have been certain death for us.
По существу прозвучал призыв действовать решительно, в сжатые сроки, но осмысленно и хорошо подготовлено. Мы так не отступать, мы так и будем делать.
But some now say that these events were orchestrated by the spies inside Putin's power base, the FSB, successor to the KGB. Berezovsky, who later broke with Putin, says the FSB knew what was about to happen.
Come on, if you knew 2 years that they are preparing to fight the war, why you didn't stop that? And I might tell you without any doubts that the second war was initiated by FSB as a provocation. They provoke Chechens.
The case for conspiracy is unproven, but Putin tore up the 1996 ceasefire in any case, ordering his forces into Chechnya.
У нас нет никакой границы с Чечней. Это Российская Федерация. Все, вопрос закрыт окончательно.
This time, planning was more thorough. 3 times as many troops were massed on Chechnya's borders than in 1994. And before committing any infantry, the generals unleashed hell, sustained aerial and artillery bombardment. Then, armoured divisions, rebuilt and retrained since the dark days of the early 90s, rolled in. Putin was in fighting form.
Российские самолеты наносят удары исключительно по базам террористов. Мы будем преследовать террористов везде. В аэропорту. Значит, вы уж меня извините, в туалете поймаем, мы и в сортире их замочим, в конце концов. Все, вопрос закрыт окончательно.
As many as 250,000 Chechens fled the country, a quarter of the total population. The refugees ended up mostly in the neighbouring Republic of Ingushetia. The Russians made sure that this time they didn't lose the propaganda war either. Journalists were not allowed beyond the Chechen border. But this film by a local journalist shows life during the first few weeks of the Russian assault, with the civilian population quite literally driven underground and death falling in the streets.
Mr. Putin, tell me, is that skull over there a rebel fighter, or an innocent victim whose crime is to live in Chechnya?
A sledgehammer can't be applied with precision. The consequences were hideous, borne by ordinary people and in charnel house hospitals. Putin's war was bigger than the first one, but he escaped serious criticism.
President Putin referred to the Second Chechen War right from the beginning as an anti-terrorist operation, as a war against Islamic terror. No one in the West was particularly paying attention to this, they just thought it was propaganda. Suddenly you had 9/11 in the United States, and suddenly Islamic terror shot to the top of the agenda. And of course, almost the first person to call George W. Bush on September the 11th was Vladimir Putin. He actually used the hotline which still exists between the Kremlin and the White House. This basically disarmed Western criticism, and Putin played this beautifully.
Having secured international support, Putin looked for allies in Chechnya. Ahmed Kadyrov, Chechnya's mufti who'd switched sides in 1999, was just the man for the job.
The idea obviously was to have a Chechen strongman who would report directly to Putin, who could be relied on, and who was obviously promising to bring the population with him. But of course the population really wasn't with him, and this was the problem, that he was ruling by fear and by intimidation.
When 40 Chechens seized a Moscow theatre, they took about 800 people hostage. The Chechens threatened to blow up the theatre and everybody with it.
Our group is called Martyrs of Islam. Our goal, as we have said over and over, is to end the war and have the Russians withdraw their troops.
For a day and a half, negotiators tried to end the crisis.
I was there the whole time. I watched a negotiating team form, but we were never going to agree with the terrorists on their demands.
On day 3 of the standoff, Putin's forces were ready. They pumped a secret gas into the theatre and stormed it. At least 129 hostages died in the attack. Most, perhaps all, were killed by the Russians' knockout gas. Putin's forces shot every single Chechen in the building. The Chechens gained little world sympathy and failed to change Kremlin policy. In October 2003, Kadyrov won the presidency in an election that many view as a sham. There were fewer Russian troops on the streets, but for ordinary Chechens there was no hope of real democracy in sight.
A generation of Chechens has grown up not knowing what a civil government is, what discipline is, what it means to study. All they know is the culture of the Kalashnikov assault rifle. It's hard to do business with them.
In the end, even Kadyrov couldn't bring the rebels into line. At Grozny's VE Day celebrations in May 2004, he was assassinated. It's still unclear who was responsible, but it left Putin's plans in ruins.
I think Russia's run into a complete dead end in Chechnya. We're going to see, I think, unfortunately, a kind of extended civil war. We're looking at a place which is really slipping into chaos.
Half the country's population is dead or exiled.
I think the Chechens are at a state of mind now where everything becomes legend. And I think that there's a lot of Chechens, that believe that their destiny is to die.
When Chechnya declared independence, Russia was at its weakest. Now Russia has regained its pride and is adamant it will not surrender Chechnya. At the Nordos Theatre in Moscow, actors pay homage to friends who died in the siege. But until the two nations can reconcile, the monuments and gravestones can only multiply.
Since tonight's documentary was first broadcast on the BBC, the killing has continued by both sides. Last year, a hostage-taking by Chechen terrorists at a school in Beslan in neighboring North Ossetia ended in a bloodbath, leaving hundreds dead or wounded, most of them children. Last month, another hostage-taking in Nelchik, the capital of a neighboring republic, left dozens dead.